Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rich Simple Human. You may also be watching on LinkedIn Live, and if you are, welcome to our panel discussion. We are super excited today to be talking about something that is incredibly important and unfortunately not discussed widely enough: tinnitus, a condition that is incredibly distressing. And we're talking to a panel who have got extensive experience in all areas as well as a solution. So please stay listening, and also please subscribe to the newsletter through Rich Simple Human, either through the podcast or through my website, lindsayfrancis.co.uk, to hear more about what we've discussed and also to be reminded of the code. The guys at TinniSoothe have been incredibly generous, and if you use the code HUMAN20, you will also receive a discount on the product that we're going to dive into. So, without further ado, I am incredibly excited to have three people on my panel today: Dr. James Jackson, Howie, and Jez, and they're going to do a little introduction for themselves as well, but I'm going to ask them some really interesting questions about tinnitus, how you can deal with it, why it happens, it's becoming more prevalent, and also the solution that they have found. I'm going to start by talking to Dr. James Jackson, and I'm going to ask him what is tinnitus and why it develops. But before you answer the question, James, would you mind just doing a quick introduction of yourself?
Yes, certainly. First of all, thank you, Lindsay, for having us today. My name is James. I'm a reader in psychology at Leeds Trinity University. I wear hearing aids. I've had tinnitus myself for almost my entire life. And partly through that, I developed a special interest, as it were, and it took me on my academic journey. But so you know, tinnitus is effectively sound in the absence of external sound. So, on one level, it indicates a damaged ear that is sending random and spontaneous signals to the brain, and the brain believes it. So it's very different from, say, hearing voices or the kind of things you were getting schizophrenia, etc., which is spontaneous activity in the brain. With tinnitus, it's activity in the ear. It's also linked in with hearing loss. So sometimes you find that if the brain isn't receiving anything from the ear, it becomes more sensitive, it's trying to hear things, and sometimes it picks up the natural mechanisms of the ear and processes that as sound instead. So what you get is a noise that has nothing outside. It can be very prominent as well. And for that reason, it becomes a problematic negative stimulus over which you have no control. So for many people, it can be like a buzzing noise, hissing. Me, I get planes droning overhead, out of tune elbow, church bell on a hill in fog, that sort of thing. And the problem with it is that no matter where I am, it's there. I'm quiet, it's there. I walk out the door, it's there. If next door is playing their TV too loud, you could turn yours up to compensate. You could go out for a walk. If I do that with my tinnitus, then I will take my tinnitus with me. So it's that kind of sustained pressure over a long period of time that links tinnitus to things like clinical depression, where people are 3 times more likely to be clinically depressed. It's the same with anxiety, significant issues with sleep, and it can be distressing and debilitating. 1 in 7 people have tinnitus. It's more common with age, noise damage, other such things like that. But at the same time, it's not something that should be taken lightly. People find it difficult to live with.
Thank you, James, so much for that. And I really hope anybody listening might now share this episode with people that may be suffering, because, as you say, 1 in 7, those are extraordinary numbers. And there is not a solution, if you like, but we believe that we have a product here that can certainly help. I'm going to come now to Jez, and I'm going to ask you, Jez, A, just to introduce yourself very quickly, but B, also talk to us about some more statistics around tinnitus and share the fact that it is becoming more prevalent, which is quite worrying.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. So I'm Jez Lawson. I'm the co-founder of TinniSoothe. Joined Howie, who's been a friend of mine for many, many years, 20 odd years. He'll tell you his story later on, which really inspired me to make a big change in my career, jump out of a very different world and help Howie try and bring his idea to market and make his invention a reality. So you'll hear more about that later on. And as you rightly say, we don't position it as a solution. You can't solve tinnitus, but you can certainly manage tinnitus and learn to live well with it. And sound therapy is one such way of doing that. So we'll get into that. As you quite rightly say, the statistics are very interesting. As James already mentioned, 1 in 7 people live with long-standing or persistent tinnitus, which puts it at about 1 billion people on the planet. That's the estimation. And then, of course, within that, there's a range of prominence. So for some people, they live with persistent chronic tinnitus, but it doesn't necessarily impact their daily life. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are people who really, really are impacted very severely, may have associated mental health issues as well around anxiety, depression, and particularly insomnia, because as James mentioned earlier, quiet places are quite often the worst environment for people who live with tinnitus. So the estimates vary a bit, but roughly speaking, it's thought that 15 to 20% of that billion people live with very impactful, burdensome tinnitus. So that's probably around 150, 200 million people on the planet. So it is very common, and it is, as you rightly say, Lindsay, not talked about widely enough. One more thing to add to that is that the prevalence of tinnitus seems to be getting more pronounced. So last January 2024, the World Health Organization put out a report which talked about the risks to young people who are in particular gaming, using noise cancelling headphones for hours and hours on end at decibel levels that are unsafe and run the risk of hearing loss and or tinnitus. So while tinnitus is sometimes thought of as an older condition that comes alongside hearing loss, there's stronger evidence coming through that all ages can be impacted by this.
That's absolutely brilliant, Jez. And for people who are now wondering why on earth is Lindsay Francis talking about this, as a trained, internationally recognised sophrologist, we do a lot of work in sophrology around sound. We're talking here about something very specific with hearing, but when I have been using sound consciousness in my work, it's been transformational in the way people feel, think and behave, becoming very acutely aware of certain sounds. And as you progress through the sophrology levels, which is a discipline that's been around since the 1950s, sound plays an enormous part in shifting our conscious awareness and attention. So Jez and I started talking about this some time ago. We're lucky enough to be in the Remedy Health group together, which is a wonderful group of professionals, very, very well supported and highly sought after global professionals. So we had this idea of, okay, there's a link here. Sound is so important. Our 5 senses are so integral to who we are. But you've just heard Jez explain the fact that when we have this sort of overwhelm, we're currently wearing noise cancelling headphones. We're wearing Bluetooth earpieces. We're being connected in very different ways to how we would have been years and years ago. This is having a very, very serious impact. So Jez, thank you for that. And we'll come back maybe to a bit more about the sound therapy later on, because this is a very underutilised sense. And of course, when it's disrupted, as it is in the case of tinnitus, it becomes extremely uncomfortable. My next question is for Howie. Howie, get ready. I'd love you to introduce yourself a little bit, and then also just tell us a little bit about your story with tinnitus, please.
Yeah, as James said, thanks for having us on. Yeah, so I'm a fairly average Joe who worked in a normal corporate career in risk, probably over about 20 years in London. That's where I met Jez back in the kind of Dow Jones days of working. I found myself with tinnitus one day, which I'll tell you about briefly, and I ended up founding TinniSoothe to help, as Jez mentioned as well, to help manage it. And that led to me diving out of the corporate space for some time to launch, along with a very small team, self-funded, the world's first wearable white noise device for tinnitus, where we don't need anything in or around your ears. And that's our story in an absolute nutshell. But my story as well is, so my tinnitus story specifically, it's common in many, many ways with a lot of people's story. maybe a couple of twists. My tinnitus was noise induced, so I got it through hearing damage, which is one of the very, very common causes, and what we're talking about when we're talking about kind of people listening to sounds that are too loud. I was playing guitar in a band too near a speaker, and the ringing that is very, very common to musicians and audiophiles that normally goes after a lot of music one evening never stopped. And I discovered over the first few days that it was tinnitus. I didn't know anything about tinnitus before. And I started researching, and very, very familiar. The panic set in. I learned what it was. I learned there was no cure. I learned all of these horror stories. And that was really the start of a very long journey. For me, the doctor and the ENT specialist didn't really have an answer. There's still a lot of, you just need to get used to it out there. And I lived in denial, I guess, for a couple of years, and I just tried everything under the sun. So you do all the reading, and then you try everything that comes up. So you try chiropractor, herbal supplements, hypnotherapy, CBT, mindfulness. I even tried this NHS trial injecting through your eardrum, which was very painful. And I just kind of went on that journey of trying everything. And then 5 years later, I had a massive windsurfing crash, and I dissected an artery in my neck, which led to a brainstem stroke. And I was in a coma, had brain surgery, and a long rehab after that in terms of learning to walk and talk and do everything, really. So a combo of that traumatic brain injury and the stress of that kind of upheaval of life made it all much worse. And over 10, 12 years, my journey's been up and down, really, with tinnitus. We'll talk about it later, I know, but it's ultimately, for me, I found that sound therapy was very very helpful and has really eased my journey. But the principle really being, as per this whole conversation, tinnitus is not just about hearing. It's about your wellness. It's about your emotions. It's not like a broken arm that can be seen and fixed. There is a whole lot of other stuff going on that is emotional as well as physical.
That's a great explanation, and thank you, Howie, for being brave enough to share your story. When we put together this panel, we all talked about the fact that the four of us have got a real heart for helping other people, and none of us would wish anybody to be suffering in some of the ways that we have done. And Howie, I really appreciate you being public about the situation that you faced. I'm going to come back to James now, because what's also interesting about tinnitus is there seems to be a very strong relationship between tinnitus and stress as well. James, could you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yes, certainly. Think about tinnitus, if it comes on quite suddenly, you hear a noise that wasn't there before. Some people will literally go, and they'll turn over and they'll go back to sleep. I've had people come up to me after talks and say, I've got tinnitus. And their partner of 30 years will turn to them and go, you never told me. So for some people, some fundamental level, it's fine. It's just there. But if you're lying there at night and you hear a noise and you can think to yourself, what is that? Am I losing my hearing? Do I have a tumour? Is it going to carry on? Will it get worse? And suddenly people start viewing it in a more negative way because they don't know what it is. And then you find you always have that thing there. If you're concerned about something, you will pay more attention to it. And because you're focusing more attention on it, it seems to get louder. And because it's getting louder, you're going to get more worried about it. And you get into what we call, you'll be familiar as well, with get into a positive feedback loop. And the emotional areas of the brain start kicking in, and they start ensuring that you pay attention. I tell my students, simply, every single one of our ancestors survived, at least long enough to have more ancestors. So we've been primed on a fundamental evolutionary level to look at horrible things, because it's the horrible thing jumping out the hedge that's going to get you. So if you see your tinnitus as being unpleasant and you focus your attention on it, it's going to seem to be louder simply because you're trying harder and you're focusing on it. If you're under stress, you are more likely than before to focus on threat. You're going to focus on the tiger, not on how your shirt sleeves feel. and you're going to pay more attention to it. So if you have an unpleasant sensation and you're under stress, it will always seem to be louder than it would be if you were in a period of calm. You also find that stress and anxiety are not quite the same thing. But they go together in that anxiety is very much a future-orientated thing. So it's always about, well, it's bad now, it's going to be worse later. And as long as you have that fear for the future, it's always going to be something that's very difficult to control. You start having stress, you start having issues with sleep, and because you don't sleep very well, you become more stressed, and all of a sudden people just get trapped in these loops, and they don't really have any way to get out of it. And tinnitus is a perfect example again of something that isn't really under your control. You can't turn it off. You can't really do anything for it. There is no cure for it. It's about managing and enduring the bad days, being aware that there are good days, and knowing the difference between the two.
That's a great explanation, James. Thank you so much. And that really resonates with so much of my work. I spend an awful lot of time saying to people, what you focus on, you move towards. And they sort of sometimes say, oh, you're talking about manifestation, Lindsay. And I say, absolutely not. I'm talking about what you've just explained, James. When we focus on something, we tend to become much, much more aware of it. And of course, easier said than done. That's why we're so keen to encourage people in my field to focus on what they really do want and not on what they don't want, especially if we're talking about parenting and marriage. What do you really want from this? Not what do you not want? And that is a psychological trick. James, you've just said that anxiety is future orientated. Would you mind just unpacking that a little bit more? Because that's a very, very key misunderstanding, and you've explained beautifully. Our ancestors survived because they were aware of the threat and they defended themselves accordingly. But that doesn't apply now. So anxiety is future orientated. Tell us more.
Yes, I mean, it's usually the case. I mean, that you have that nowadays. We don't have the same kind of threats and stresses that other animals have. There's a book I advise everybody to read. It's called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And the fundamental reason is, too long didn't read, is that zebras are too stupid in order to be able to grasp the concept of future. They're hungry or they're not. They're being chased by a lion or they're not. They're ill or they're not. Only human beings have the unique capacity to think ahead and worry about things that haven't happened yet. So we could conceivably come out of our door of our farmhouse and locusts have swept in and they've just eaten all of our crops. We've just had breakfast. On a full stomach, we are capable of imagining ourselves starving. So no matter how we feel now, we have the capacity to think it's going to be worse later. And that 21st century life is not very helpful. So when you have tinnitus, for example, it just says it's bad now, it's going to be bad later, it's going to get worse. We're into the concept of catastrophizing. The idea of imagining things are going to be worse. I mean, I have various sounds as well. I won't go into too much detail, but I occasionally get one I used to call like the knitting needle. It's the idea when it's a sudden high-pitched one, apart from all the other sounds, that comes in so suddenly, it actually makes me startle, even though in reality there's nothing there. And it almost seems to come in like a knitting needle into the head. It almost feels physical. It's very loud, it's very high-pitched, and it shocks me. And when I used to get that, I'd think, oh no, the day's ruined. I just can't cope with this. Or it'll last for several days. Oh, it's awful. Nowadays, though, simple reframing, it's not even CBT, it's just now I know that whenever that occurs, it's just my body telling me that I've overdone it. And then I tend to sit down, cup of tea, something, floats away, everything's fine. But previous me used to fear for the rest of the day, the rest of the week, and you could spiral off a bit. That's the issue with stress. As long as you're fearing the future or fearing the unknown or something that's unpredictable or something out of your control, it's stressful.
Yeah, that is a really great example. And actually, there's a passage, a verse that says, she laughs without fear of the future. When we can live in that space without fear of the future, everything makes so much more sense, doesn't it? It's gratitude practice, etc. I'm going to add an extra question. I hope that's okay. And I'm going to direct it at Jez quickly, because what you've just described, James, is a noise coming in all of a sudden. And since Jez and I were talking a while ago, I've noticed myself sometimes I might have a noise in my head, and I'm not suggesting I've got tinnitus. But for people that are now listening thinking, I'm now afraid I've actually got tinnitus, could we try and support them with what might be going on? So, Jez, I'm just going to unmute you and allow you to answer that question, if that's okay. If you think you're the best person. Somebody suddenly noticed this noise, what would you say?
Don't panic. Try not to panic. I mean, we all live with various noises as human beings. Some of them are physical because we have blood vessels and other things and nerve pathways, around our auditory canal. So sometimes we all hear things, but that can be quite different to living with persistent tinnitus, which is, as James has very articulately described, and how it can be really, really debilitating. So I think if someone has got a sudden sound in their head, try to stay calm, keep the limbic system calm, because that's a difficult path to go down. But if someone is genuinely concerned, of course, about their hearing, or they have sudden hearing loss, then they should definitely go and see a GP as quickly as possible and get a referral. That's a very different thing. But I think we all live with sounds all the time, particularly at night time. Probably all remember times when we've heard things, especially if we've been in a noisy environment all day, or we've been to a gig or a pub, and the world is getting busier and noisier. For those people who have genuinely persistent tinnitus, there are many things they can do. We call it the tinnitus toolkit, and a lot of that is around trying to sort of accept that you're living with tinnitus, and therefore your prefrontal cortex is not giving hyper attention to it. Your limbic system is not hyper aroused into emotional distress. So you can use CBT or ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, etc. Sound therapy is what we specialize in, and Howie's invention was very, very simple, but quite ingenious, if I might say so. It's a wearable sound therapy device. So you literally wear it around your neck. It's very small, it's lightweight, and it's discreet, and you can fine tune it so that the gentle sort of shushing sound that comes from it cocoons towards your ears but is not in your ears. And people who live with tinnitus can find this quite a beneficial way of distracting their brain from the maddening sound in their head and take it away a little bit towards the external sound. And I'm not a scientist, but I think about things in very layman's terms. And if you think about tinnitus as a sound that is inside your head that you have not chosen, you do not like, and you cannot control. And TinniSoothe, as an example, is a way of wearing a sound that you have chosen. You hopefully do like, or you don't mind it at least, and you very much can control the settings of it. And that gives people agency. And when users have agency and a feeling of more control, that in itself can help be a bit of a circuit breaker for this sort of loop of anxiety, tinnitus, anxiety. And James quite rightly points out the future-oriented element of anxiety, because we get a lot of feedback from users who say, I used to worry about what situation I would find myself in during the day. Would I end up in a really quiet situation? Would I be in a work meeting where my tinnitus spikes? Would I, what if? And that's creating stress hormones and other things which are then making the tinnitus more prominent. So we get a lot of people saying, frankly, the TinniSoothe device is a circuit breaker and it's a safety blanket. I know that wherever I am in the day and whatever happens, I've got my TinniSoothe on. The gentle noise is just there as a friendly sound that's hopefully going to help take the edge off my tinnitus. And there's a nighttime setting as well, not to get into the product too much, but you dock it into a docking cradle, and that then recharges the battery and it plays your nighttime sounds, which can be extremely burdensome for tinnitus sufferers because nighttime is as quiet as it gets normally. And so that's where it can become most prominent of all. And so that's an important stage to help people get to sleep, stay asleep, and when they wake up, not worry about, is my tinnitus going to flare up as soon as I wake?
I would like to come back to talk about the product in more detail, but I'm just going to circle back. First of all, before I come back to James in a moment, Jez, can I just ask you, is tinnitus always a permanent disturbance, or can it come and go?
It certainly can come and go. And in fact, I mean, and again, I'm not a scientist, but I live with a bit of transient tinnitus myself. So I have very sudden, high-pitched, 30-second bursts of, oh my goodness, what is that? And then it just goes. And that happens relatively frequently for me, but I would never say I live with tinnitus because I know, having spent many years working with Howie and now in the last 5 years spoken to hundreds of people who live with what I call proper tinnitus, that I would never say I live with tinnitus, but we've all probably experienced coming from a club or a concert or the next day where you felt that sort of strange sensation inside your head. Imagine living with that all the time and potentially at much louder levels. So some people have described their tinnitus as being like a jet engine when a plane takes off. And of course, it's different for everyone. And this is the other thing with tinnitus. Very, very subjective. And you asked a question earlier, Lindsay, about what advice would you give to people who kind of are starting to experience tinnitus. The other piece of advice, I think, is the first person they tell, whether it's a friend, family member, or a clinician, my advice to that person is please don't dismiss this. Even though tinnitus is 99% of the time subjective, which means it is a phantom sound, it is extremely real to the person who's experiencing it. And so often people aren't validated, including a lot of teenagers whose parents go, you're making it up or whatever. Please don't do that. Please listen to them, hear their story, and try and help them stay calm about what is happening to them.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we might put that in the title, actually, don't dismiss tinnitus, because it is incredibly distressing. I'm going to come back to James. James, I want to just ask you, because my work and a lot of sophrology work is focused around the nervous system, and we often say the levers and the buttons of the nervous system are the breath and the heart rate, and we turn the nervous system down by focusing on those and doing various activities to change them. Would you mind telling people why things like CBT and sound therapy can help with tinnitus and what's actually going on there?
Yes, I mean, we take CBT as an example, although, it's a word that gets thrown around a lot, terms of actual cognitive behavioural therapy or taking some ideas from it. The fact is that tinnitus is there. The question is, how much attention are you going to pay to it? Generally speaking, when you have a fluctuation during the day, when it's louder, you're under more stress. You're paying attention to it because things are negative, and there's that emotional subconscious element of looking for threat. Whereas when you're calmer, it fades away a little because you're not paying so much attention to it. It's there, and it's really a question of are you tapping into it and paying attention to it or not. Cognitive behavioural therapy, as one arm of many things that can be done, is explaining, like, say, the example of the reframing exercise that I suggested before. Is it a new noise that's going to ruin my day? Or is it something that's just happening because I'm under stress? And I recognise that, have a cup of tea, something like that, confident that everything will settle back again. So it's about, on some fundamental level, understanding how your tinnitus works, what the triggers are, things you can avoid. And if there are some things that make your tinnitus worse, there's also the other side of the argument. There are some things that you can do to make your tinnitus not as bad. So generally speaking, when it fluctuates during the day, it isn't changing at all. You are. And it's the things that you can actually do to make those challenging moments a little easier and to reward. And I'm sure you're comfortable with the same sort of jargon as I am about being compassionate to yourself and ensuring that you do the things that can help. Other things like mindfulness, for example, we talked about it very briefly before the podcast, didn't we? But the idea there are parts of the brain that are used when you are solving problems, when you are thinking, you are very active. There are other parts of the brain that come into play when you're not active. So you're not on or off. It's different systems. And this system that's much more active when you're calm or when you're not doing anything is very important for creativity. The idea, I'll sleep on it, and the next morning you've come up with an answer. It's that bit. But at the same time, left to its own devices, it will play through old memories. And it's the example of certain songs on your playlist, and it's linked very strongly to rumination, thinking about things. And as you stop thinking about things, this one comes into play like a seesaw effect between the two. Certain things you can learn, like mindfulness, can be an example of how to live in the moment and stop this other bit kicking in to remind you about all the other things that you've done and all the other things that you've got to do that it's now time to worry about. It's a way of, arguably, all these methods in a way are training yourself to live with, and I think the key phrase is to coexist with your tinnitus, to be kind to yourself at the moment when you're under stress, to reward yourself with relaxation and calm and doing the things that you still enjoy. And this is just one more example. It may sound silly, but some people won't drink coffee or tea because of the belief that caffeine will make tinnitus worse. I love a cup of coffee, and I refuse to let my tinnitus stop me from having that cup of coffee. So you could argue, big cup of coffee, my tinnitus might be worse later, but that's my choice, and I've made that. Allow your tinnitus to stop you from going to quiet places, or from having a glass of red wine, or doing the other thing. It puts you in a bad place. You can always, and I think it was, Jez said something before, sense of agency. The idea when you know there are things that you can do that will help you, or choices you can make, you perfectly willing to agree with the consequences, you will be coexisting with your tinnitus from a happier, more positive, more assertive place.
James, thank you so much. That's absolutely fantastic. It's so interesting, isn't it? This choice and the understanding of the different operating systems. I think sometimes we've lost that piece of knowledge. And if you missed the book that James referenced earlier, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, please go and have a look at it, or chat GPT your way through the extract, because when we understand how our operating systems work and why we're designed the way we're designed, it makes so much more sense that we weren't designed to be always on, inundated with technology and engaging basically with robots a lot of the time, which I find deeply frustrating. I'm going to come to Howie now, and I want to ask you, because you are the inventor and the creative behind this, I want to ask you about the device and how it works, and also how it came about. In fact, anything you'd like to share, because it's such a powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. I think to go back to what I was mentioning about the story of getting tinnitus, it's a very common thing when you get tinnitus that you go into this panic mode, and people, if it's going to take hold, people can really, really struggle. And one of the biggest things that people struggle with, and particularly with chronic tinnitus, is silence. So you get to the point where you're always avoiding silence. And if you think about some of the things that James mentioned, you can go into a room and think it's silent, even though it's a fan. There's a fan running, or there's a fridge running. It's because your brain you don't perceive that sound as a threat, so you have no emotional reaction to the sound. So things like fans, fridges are great for people with tinnitus, because they just take the edge off of silence. So they take the edge off of that noise in your head. So as a tinnitus sufferer, I was always avoiding silence. So my day would be like, I would get up and have a white noise machine next to my bed. I'd get up, I'd go downstairs, I'd switch the radio on, get ready for work, I'd leave, I'd put my earphones in, and so I had music which plugs your ears and makes it actually worse initially. And at work, I'd have a laptop with white noise gently on the laptop. I worked in an open plan office, and I had white noise on the laptop, and it wasn't a problem. What I realized very soon was that no one actually noticed it. And I thought, that's really weird. Well, I could take my laptop into a meeting room with just very subtle white noise, and no one would notice it. And it always really, really surprised me. So I realized that actually, well, no one's really mentioned the fan. You hear the sound, that they might hear the sound, and you just assume it's something else, and it doesn't bother you. So because I went through every day, all day, switching things on and off, logging onto apps to create a sound that helped me take my brain off the sound. That would be my day and night. And I just got to the point where I thought, oh, this is crazy. And I actually bought these kind of round the neck earphones, and I'd wear them to take the dog out for a walk, and while I was working at home and around the house, and I just have gentle white noise playing. And it was great. And it really helped me. But then I couldn't wear them all the time because, the battery didn't last long enough. I couldn't go out in them. So I was still taking things on and off. And I just thought, I just need to find a simple, wearable white noise device, because white noise always really helped me and is well known for helping people with tinnitus. No Bluetooth. You mentioned in a robot world, but no Bluetooth, no Wi-Fi, no logging in, nothing in and out of the ears. And I just wanted something that lasted all day, just to put on and forget about. and I could not find it anywhere. I did all the normal shopping searches online everywhere, and I could not find anything that didn't have the earphones attached, or or it wouldn't have a long enough battery, or it'd be too big, and there was just nothing. So I decided, as a part of the crazy journey, that it needed to exist. So initially, with my brother Lloyd, who's an electronical engineer, we built some prototype devices in Tupperware kitchen boxes, and tested those out. And then we gave it to a few other people that we knew, friends and family who had tinnitus. One of them is a drummer, and has suffered with tinnitus for like 20, 30 years. And the feedback was really good, even though there was these little Tupperware containers and stuff. And that was it's a very long story, but 5 years later, Jez joined us on that journey, as he mentioned earlier, to help build the business. And so 5 years later, we launched last year. I had my accident in the interim, which is why we're probably a bit delayed to get to market. Yeah, and I wear it every day, and it's just a small, as Jez showed you, small wearable, just subtle white noise. We added a clip on, so you can actually you can put your own necklace through there. I don't know if you can see that, or you can put it so it clips onto your clothes. Very, very fine micro adjustments, and then you take it off at night. You dock it. Nighttime settings plays. If you have slightly distinct settings at night, recharges, take it off, and up to 72 hours battery, normally around 36 to 48. So the goal with it was that you get up in what, as James was saying, about thinking about your tinnitus. How do you not think about your tinnitus? Well, you don't spend your day turning things on and off, right? That's one of the big things. You don't spend your day turning things on and off and worrying about silence. So how do you get out of silence? Well, you create your own tiny cocoon of sound, and that's what it does. And you know, we it's really interesting with having gone to market, because, and we're very, very open about this, and on the website we never use the word cure, we never use the word solution. There are so many claims out there of things that are cures, these crazy inventions, and they go, you know, solve your tinnitus in 30 days, or, you know, 5 minutes, whatever. We don't do that. We are we try to be very, very honest about the fact that TinniSoothe can help you manage your tinnitus to a point where hopefully your brain will forget about the tinnitus, and you can lead to, I know we haven't talked about it, you can lead towards habituation. And habituation is really where you don't perceive the sound as a threat anymore, and your whole system calms down about the sound, and you worry about it less. And it's the reverse cycle. Because you worry about it less, you think about it less. Because you think about it less, you hear it less. You know, and I think the final thing to mention is really, you know, Jez has highlighted this. Tinnitus is so subjective. TinniSoothe is part of a toolkit, and you should have a tinnitus toolkit. Chronic sufferers should have a toolkit. Everyone should be aware of CBT. Everyone should have obviously been to the doctors and made sure there's nothing sinister in that 1% chance. But you've got to work out and understand what is your own comfort blanket. What things for you take the edge off. That's really what everything that we try and convey with TinniSoothe. We've had some people that have genuinely, literally come back to us on email and said, this device has literally saved my life. We have had others that have said, this does nothing for me. And we're very open about that. You know, luckily it's more the former than the latter, but it's so subjective. So, you know, people with uncorrected hearing loss perhaps wouldn't hear the noise, or they'd have to have it too loud. But it depends. Do they live alone? Are they out and about? It completely depends. So, and that's why we have a 30-day money-back guarantee. So I think the key point is, you know, it's part of a toolkit, and everybody should find their own tinnitus toolkit.
That's absolutely brilliant. I love the way you described that, Howie, being cocooned in a sort of bubble of sound, if you like, but not just in a, not like having your headphones on and you're just locked into Florence and the Machines or whatever you've got thumping in your ears, which is a particular favourite of mine if I'm feeling really cross. But this cocoon of sound that allows you to focus on something away from the attention. And then you say the habituation comes in. I mean, this is so sophrology. It's just wonderful. All of this technology based around the nervous system. It's so exciting. I'm going to come to Jez next, rather than yap on about my own life, because Jez, I'd really like you to talk about the feedback that you've had from users, because you're very, very engaged with users. And like Howie has said, there's a balance here. But for people listening, this is a device that's well worth trying. Jez, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Lindsay. So as Howie's mentioned, we basically have a model where people can buy it and try it. And if it doesn't work for them within 30 days, we just give their money back. But it's helped an enormous amount of people so far. We've had some incredible feedback, particularly from military veterans and serving personnel, from musicians, a lot of people in the construction world and machinists, even primary school teachers, believe it or not, who live in work in noisy environments. And there's one review actually I'd love to read out in a minute because it really sums everything up. But equally, there are those who won't find it soothing, and in fact, James won't mind me saying that it didn't work for him because of his hearing loss. And therefore, we always say to people that, if you have severe or profound hearing loss, this may not help you because you might not be able to hear it sufficiently for it to be a soothing device. But we found so far that 76% of people who bought the device sight unseen from the websites, they've never touched it, never felt it, never played with it, never turned it on. 76% of people have kept it after the 30 days, which we're pretty pleased with. And then when there's been a consultation or a demonstration involved, either through an independent audiologist or we've done a demonstration, then it's 91%. So we're pretty pleased with that. Some of the feedback has been extraordinary. Howie's already mentioned we do get genuine feedback and emails from people who said, "Look, this has saved my life." And there's one in particular I want to read out because it's in front of me now, which I think really just sums it up pretty well. It's from Wendy in Ireland, who says, "TinniSoothe has changed my life for the better. I was diagnosed with pulsatile tinnitus in 2020, along with a migraine condition. I was literally going out of my mind as one condition exacerbated the other. Everything I used to enjoy was now hell, especially quiet environments, and trying to sleep was the absolute worst. I've had the TinniSoothe device for over a year now, and I love it. It's meant my tinnitus is no longer overpowering my day. Most times, I'm even oblivious to it. I sleep better, and I'm in a way better headspace." So that's kind of, Howie's original vision for this is basically that, is to help people to manage their day, manage their sleep better at night, and get into a better headspace as a result. And that then allows them to do all the things in life that they love doing and enjoy doing. And that might be going hiking in the hills, or it might just be playing with the 6-year-old and 4-year-old kids. It's whatever your lifestyle is and whatever brings you joy, family, friends, work, whatever. If we can help people take a bit of control back and get back to doing what they love, then that all helps, of course, with the emotional reaction to the tinnitus.
Yeah, that's wonderful. What a great testimonial to read out. And that's one of so many. I'm going to ask James quickly about the clinical trial. James, could you tell us a little bit, for anybody on the fence about, shall I buy this device or not? The answer is yes, of course. And there's an amazing discount code that we're sharing as well. But James, can you tell us a bit about the clinical trial that's currently, I think, underway or has just recently finished? And I need to just unmute you. Hang on a moment. James, you're back in the room.
Well, yes, I know that there's a few things that we've been doing. That one that's been published recently with, Jed had mentioned, being an interesting pilot with combat stress, with the idea of how veterans, because again, there's always a sense of the military as being the perfect example of a noisy environment, with like rifles and guns and everything else, and perforated eardrums and all kinds of other things there. And actually, then people who are veterans, they leave the service and they have, much increased risk of tinnitus. And the paper that's been produced quite recently, not a paper that I've been involved in, but with other people as well, have actually shown that TinniSoothe can have benefit for people who come out of the military and they have tinnitus because of their previous jobs. over, a period of time of use. So they're moving forward in order to a larger study. At the same time, at my own university, then we're looking again at people who were using TinniSoothe, qualitative interviews of users for people with TinniSoothe, in order to find out when they're using it, how they're using it, this sort of information, in order to feed back to Howie and to Jez, in order to provide more information about how people use the product, in order to improve it, and importantly, to help provide the best possible education for people with tinnitus to know how to use what they have to best effect.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. As we're coming towards the end of our time together, I'm going to just ask all of you some open questions and see if there's anything else you want to add. And I would just ask anybody out there listening who's got a platform, perhaps anything in the media, that if they would like to talk to any of you about this, you're very, very willing to share this message, to talk about how important it is, and also to make those links with sound therapy that's becoming a bit more popular. People are going to sound baths, various other things. And not to distract from what we're talking about, but this is a very, very important human facility or faculty that we have. And when it's disturbed, the results really are catastrophic. Just opening up to the room, is there anything else we can share? Jez, could you talk a bit about the price of the product and anything anybody else would like to add to today's discussion?
Sure. TinniSoothe is available at TinniSoothe.com. That's how you spell TinniSoothe. Little beer mat there. And as we mentioned a couple of times already, it's a 30-day money-back guarantee. It's £365, including VAT. That's a one-off cost. There's no recurring charges. That is basically it. And that includes the whole kit, daytime, nighttime, etc. No, I think, look, other than that, I probably should have said a little bit about the clinical trial. Thank you, James, for covering that off. It's with the Combat Stress Center for Applied Military Health Research under Professor Dominic Murphy. And we're really excited about that because they've already run a feasibility study with military veterans, which is a sector we really love to support. That was very positive, about to be published in a peer-reviewed journal. And now we're underway with the clinical trial. So we're eagerly awaiting those results. The last thing I would say is if anyone is wondering about tinnitus and this whole association with the auditory system, but as well as the attention and the emotional system. There's a very good book out at the moment, in addition to Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. There's one specifically on tinnitus that Dr. Gladys Sander has just published called Beyond the Noise. And it's a very nice, accessible sort of book for people to read if they're not, specialist in the area. So that's a little plug for Gladys. It's a great book.
Amazing. That's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. James, I'm just going to come back to you.
Yes, if I could just say as well, I think from a paper that I'm publishing soon does actually really showcase that when people go to see their doctor about tinnitus, just to be aware that sometimes the GP, the audiologist, the ENT people you see will start to see tinnitus as a symptom. Is it like a symptom of hearing loss? Let's check for this, let's check for that. Do make sure that if you are distressed by your tinnitus, do make sure to press your case that your tinnitus is distressing and that you'd like support for your tinnitus as a condition and not that it's just trying to highlight something else, because otherwise people can feel a little bit disappointed with the help they receive.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm also wondering for listeners who are in the States, because we have a huge range or reach to America. Just do you ship to America? How does that work at the moment?
Really, really good point. Thank you, Lindsay. Not currently. So we wanted to be a registered Class 1 medical device. It was important for us to go through the regulatory hoops and do it all properly and not just go out there as a well-being device. So we have gone through those hoops in both the UK and the European Union. So we ship to all countries in the UK and the EU, and we've just begun our FDA submission process in the US. So we're going to be certainly a few months away from that yet, but hopefully we will get there and we'll keep people updated.
So for those of you that missed that, it's currently a Class 1 medical device in the UK and the EU and soon to be coming to America as well. Guys, before we close for today, anything else anybody would like to add to the conversation before we end?
I'd probably jump in there. Advice would be, look, I don't know how many hundreds, thousands, millions of listeners you have, Lindsay. I'm sure there are millions. But the reality is, 1 in 7 will have experienced tinnitus, and a percentage of those will be chronically suffering. They'll have burdensome, traumatic tinnitus. So my advice would just be, look, if you're struggling, speak to somebody, because 1 in 7 people you speak to will have experienced it as well. And actually, it's amazing how many people come out of the woodwork that are struggling, but don't feel that it's a worthy condition for discussion or for comment. And apart from going to your doctor, if you are worried, there's a great UK charity for tinnitus, which is Tinnitus UK, and they're fantastic, and they're a great place to go for advice and to help you out if you're really struggling.
Amazing. Thank you. And we will link all the links in the show notes. James.
Yes, just one more thing as well. It's worth pointing out that many people have a very vivid recollection of exactly when they first developed tinnitus, whether it's like April 20th, etc. People really do remember this. So 2 things to point out. First, tinnitus always seemed worse at onset or in the first few months after onset, and that there is, hope for improving. There is no cure for tinnitus currently, so it's not curative. It's about coping with it. It's about adapting to it. And it's worth pointing out that we need to consider thinking about tinnitus almost like a bereavement. I apologize for the light quality here, but you have to an extent let go of the idea that your tinnitus will go, that it will be taken away, and have to accept that it's here. It's going to be a part of the rest of your life. And as you progress and you accept that, it becomes a very neutral part of your life rather than a negative part of your life as people move over time towards habituation. And once people accept that tinnitus is there, interventions start to work. And then for that reason, people will take the steps necessary in order to improve and see improvements in their quality of life.
Well, James, thank you so much for reminding us. And to come back to something Howie shared, just enjoy the fact that when you get your device, you'll be cocooned in this bubble of noise that feels comforting. I just loved that visualization. Before we close, Jez, just remind us the website address, please.
www.TinniSoothe, TinniSoothe.com. Not tennis shoes, which is the name of our WhatsApp chat, but TinniSoothe.
It's been an absolute pleasure to sit down with the three of you. You've blown me away as the innovator, as the entrepreneur, and as the academic. What an incredible panel you are. And I love a panel discussion. It feels like I've had a night out with all of you. So thank you so much. And until next time, please check out the website. Please do share, especially with people that might be struggling. And don't forget that the code Human20 is available to you today to get a discount on the product that is also available for you to try and see how you get on. Until next time, take care.